Hey, Julie, how's it going?
It is going well, Jason. How about you?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm back from the road and I'm ready for another episode.
Where were you?
I was in San Diego, California at Directions North America 2024, the annual partner event for, I guess you'd say, SMB Dynamics 365 partners.
Okay. I have
Yeah.
never been to that event.
Yeah, it's a good one. It tends to be fairly Business Central focused, and but there's a good element of Power Platform these days. There's some CE as well. There's always at least some CE representations, MVPs, and Microsoft representatives and so forth. But yeah, it's heritage is in the Nav and now Business Central field. But it was I think any event you go to these days is going to be full of talk about the broader Microsoft landscape, right? Everything from specific Business Central features to Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI. Um, Microsoft 365 certainly was in the mix as well. Teams is always being discussed. So you really, even though it's a BC focused event, you really get a little of everything there, I would say.
Even some talk of Copilot.
Even a little talk of Copilot. Yeah, going to a Microsoft Focus event these days, there's no avoiding Copilot. We were inundated with Copilot. I saw tons of Copilot demos from the Business Central perspective, um, and a lot of talk about. In fact, we have an article. I mean, one of the terms I kind of pulled from Microsoft's presentations at the event was to help asking partners to help customers find their Copilot moment, which I think is sort of an interesting turn of phrase that Microsoft has sort of engineered to frame up what they're asking partners to do these days. They're hoping it'll drive sales, right? I mean, that's the whole point of this, and it was everywhere. I mean, I think Microsoft must have shown 20 different, 15, 20 different Copilot related scenarios. Some of them very very small, and some of them a little more a little more involved, but they were everywhere.
Yeah, I bet. They're everywhere I look. We're heading into conference season, so there's all these session submissions and evaluations that are happening, and and AI was all over the place. I can't tell you how many sessions I have evaluated recently that have used the word Copilot.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad we're doing this session, this episode right now because I could certainly use a little more grounding, to use a bit of a generative AI, I guess, phrase here in terms of what really matters when it comes to Copilot. I see more and more demos, and I'm still a skeptic, right? I'm still not convinced that it's as useful as Microsoft wants it to be. And I'm trying to sort of still get my bearings about what's really useful versus what's, just experimental and may end up sort of falling by the wayside. So maybe this discussion will help to enlighten me a little bit more.
Well, and as anyone who's listening to our episode knows, right now we have video with our episode. It's our first one. Normally we're audio only, but we're going to do some Copilot exploring together. So we'll get to that soon, but we'll talk about Copilot a little bit first. I think Copilot is a very safe, soft landing for AI.
That I certainly agree with. And I actually think it's a really smart approach, especially in the commercial or B2B space, to have this Copilot mechanism that, or layer. Kind of think of it as a layer. I don't know if that's fair or not, but sort of sort of buffering enterprises from sort of raw Gen AI, the raw Gen AI world out there that's can be a little bit more, I would say, risky or free flowing or confusing or cutting edge. It's a little more conservative to me.
So I've included Copilot as part of an assignment in one of my cohorts that I have for students. We've talked about our Ukrainian cohorts before, and
Mm-hmm.
in their week one assignment, after they've consumed their first batch of Microsoft Learn content, we ask them about digital transformation. What is digital transformation, and why might an organization be resistant to digital transformation? Um, hopefully in the training content that they've been exposed to, they can formulate an answer. It's a very lightweight question for the beginning of a course. Then in our last week of the same course, we ask the same question, but we tell them to take that question, ask Copilot the question, and then tell me what's wrong with Copilot's answer.
Hmm.
So they're applying that critical thinking for the Copilot's response. Copilot tends to have less emotion or less appropriate emotion in its responses. I've found it to be, it tries to be empathetic, but it doesn't use conversational words. It does things like, I regret to inform you, which, sure, it shows sympathy, but that's not really how we talk.
Right, right. Well, there's a few different sort of challenges there. One is language, right? How people who speak English from one country versus another natively perceive things, and then people who are learning it as a second language perceive it um, in whatever setting they're in. So that's certainly a whole range of challenges.
Well, and that's a good way to describe it because to me, that particular phrase, I regret to inform you, certainly sets the stage to, I'm going to share some news you don't want to hear. But that's more of what I would expect from something that's been translated to me. So
Hmm.
if someone had written something in German that was basically the same thing and it goes through a translator, it comes back out, the I regret to inform you might not, it might be a direct translation, but it might not be a conversationally appropriate translation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so we've got a couple of different types of copilots. I want to set the stage with that first. So Microsoft
Okay.
gives us copilots in their products. So we've got copilot.microsoft.com. We have copilots that are exposed to users of things like PowerPoint and Dynamics and Canvas apps and so on. And those are meant to give users interaction. And they're mostly very sophisticated conversational AI bots. They've been given a task and they will only have conversations as it relates to those tasks that they've been assigned.
Right. Yeah. So it's sort of putting more strict boundaries on what they can talk about.
Right. And they're effectively just conversational. Some of
Yeah. Yeah.
the co-pilots we get in PowerPoint, for example, can do some things specifically on your slides, but it cautions you as a consumer of PowerPoint to make sure that you're evaluating what it's suggesting and what it's offering you. But then we've also got co-pilots on the maker side of things. We've got co-pilots in GitHub. We have co-pilots for making Power Automate, for making Power Pages, and so on. And those co-pilots can act on your behalf, which is a different type of co-pilot.
Right. So they can operate within they can operate sort of within the context of a business application of some sort. And they can, and the idea with Copilot though is that they're never just taking action and running with it. At least I can't think of any scenarios I've seen. It's always, like you said, it'll do something, then it'll make sure that the user is okay with it and they essentially sign off on it. And
Well, in Copilot with Power Automate, you can ask it to make the next action in your flow and it will evaluate what you've asked for and put it in place in your flow that you are editing. However, there's a quick undo button so that if it doesn't quite get what you've requested, you can undo it, but it does attempt to act on your behalf. And that's by design.
right, right.
But then we have Copilot Studio, and Copilot Studio does a couple different things. It's a legacy Power Virtual Agent, right? So what it does is it offers and helps you create chatbots. It can use generative AI to help cut some of the tedious details out of that process of building that conversational chatbot. It can point to your website and go through the information available publicly and formulate answers and so on to communicate. And those chatbots typically are just chatbots. They don't act on your behalf. But with Copilot
Right.
Studio plugins, you can extend traditional copilots and have them act on your behalf so they can do things
Mm.
within the boundaries that you have placed for them.
Right, and you might want, if I understand it, like different type of copilots. I'm not sure what the right terminology is there, but yeah, right, different ones maybe will have different limitations on them. If it's external facing, if it's one that you've set up for employees within your organization, obviously they could be enabled to have access to and take action in very different ways.
Correct. And one of the important things is to understand that you give these co-pilots boundaries. And so they're not going rogue and taking over the world, so to speak. There's nothing to be nervous about because there are guardrails put in place. It's think of like when you're bowling and you have those bumper guards that come up, so you got to go straight down the middle. You may not hit all the pins, but you're not going to go in the gutter.
So here, before we go any further, one of the things I think applies to what you've already described, and maybe some of the other things we'll discuss, is sort of the skills that are required in getting what you want, either knowing what a copilot can do and knowing how to ask for it. That seems like very much you see it done in demos. Certainly, you see I'm just going to ask for this, and then I'm going to get it, and I'm going to ask for this, and I'm going to get it, or I'll get an idea, and I'll revise it, and I'll ask the copilot to change it, and and the demo takes you through the process of getting to what you want. That seems like a real skill that needs to be developed in users if they are going to get the most out of this kind of technology. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's called prompt engineering.
All right.
So, see, everything has a buzzword, but this one kind of makes sense because you have to understand how to craft your request of a copilot. You have to kind of have an idea of what you expect to see as an outcome because AI can make mistakes. There's this whole conversation we can have about AI hallucinations, but that's a whole nother episode. But
Mm-hmm.
you have to know how to effectively communicate with the copilot so that you can get the response that you are
Well,
hoping for.
yeah, and as you just mentioned, I thought that the whole premise of one of the premises of Copilot was getting back to some of those things that will scare people, right? Like hallucinations, that it's really supposed to kind of cut down on those, but at the same time, not allow a user to start doing prompt engineering that's malicious. So I don't think you can take it nearly as far as when you see the kind of hacking that people do on AI with prompts in other spheres.
Well, and there will always be a way for a bad actor to do bad things. But the standard, everyday, well intentioned user can't screw up a lot of stuff with Copilot.
Right. Yeah.
So, do you want to ask Copilot a few questions?
Yeah. Let's ask it some questions. What do you have in mind?
So, I want to start off by saying I'm in a private browser. I'm not authenticated as a user in any capacity, and that's on purpose because in my day to day world, I am authenticated in my conversations with Copilot, and that helps a couple different ways. Copilot kind of tracks our conversations and knows what we've been talking about, but Copilot also can have access to my internal facing company documents and reference those in its responses.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a private browser, non-authenticated user. And I imagine that after my first questions, Copilot's going to make me acknowledge a couple things. So let's ask it, what is a Copilot? Okay, it's a very generic question that's actually a very bad prompt.
Yeah, and it's going to okay. So yeah, it's spitting out an answer.
This is more than you would get from your standard search engine, right? So this is a Copilot is a AI companion. These are some things you can do with it. And here's where you can find and use Copilot. And it gives you references to where it found the answers. I do have this privacy statement in terms of use that I have to agree to. They are standard Microsoft level agreements. So we're going to continue this. So let's ask about privacy considerations. So what Copilot has done is you can see that it anticipated what other information I might like to know about this topic.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just do the easy one with privacy considerations. And we're going to talk about Microsoft's responsible AI. We're going to talk about how it keeps your data separate from other people's data. It doesn't use it to train the models anymore, and so on. So we can continue that conversation. But let's talk about what is a prompt. And you'll see that I'm not being specific with my question, because a prompt outside of the context of Copilot could mean a million different things.
Right, right. Yeah,
But
it's answering
Copilot,
you in
right,
context. Yeah.
it knows the conversation we've been having. So it knows that it's an AI prompt that I'm talking about. So now we're going to ask, how can I make good prompts? And I hope it's going to tell us the ingredients of good prompts. Yes. So be specific, include context, use keywords, specify the output that I want, and iterative Q&A. So far in this conversation, we've built up our knowledge about Copilot, about what Copilot can do, what kind of concerns we may have, and now let's get to the nitty-gritty of how can I do better? So we've got some good and bad prompts here. Weather forecast is a bad prompt. What's the weather like in Tokyo this weekend is a much better prompt. So let's see. Tell me the weather for Denver in a poem. So I want the weather, I want the location, and its output should be in the form of a poem. So that's what we got.
And then it throws in a real forecast sort of graphic just in case
Exactly.
you can't
Yes.
parse what it was rhyming. It's not really
But see,
rhyming,
it
is it?
tells me that thunderstorms are coming my way, which for me is good to know because I have a little dog that's terrified of thunder. So I need to go find her shirt to put on her
Mm-hmm.
so she doesn't get anxious.
Oh, that's cute. Yeah, good to know them.
um, but in addition to this, we can ask it for things. So, like, I've been making some training content. It's kind of what I do. Um, and as well as conference submissions, I might need an updated professional bio about myself. So write a short professional bio for Julie Yak. So now it's going to go out to all of the places it has access to when it's been trained on to write a short bio for me. Let's see if it's accurate. Yes, I'm the CEO of Colorado Technology Consultants. I'm founder and principal. We provide top-notch Power Platform training. I've authored several courses.
Top
Yes,
notch.
top-notch.
Is that a phrase that you think is
No, that's
okay?
not a phrase that I've used
It
anywhere.
took that liberty calling you top notch.
Yes. Whether mentoring, training, or contributing to the community, Julie exemplifies excellence and dedication. Those are conclusions that Copilot made on its own based on information that's available. And you can see that it linked to my blog, it linked to
Mm-hmm.
my MVP profile, and it pointed to my instructor page at 365.Training.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now phrase it like a scary novel. So now we're getting a horror novel about my professional skills. Now, this is just a silly use of
Yeah.
Copilot, but we can put it in a business scenario where I'll ask Copilot for help evaluating a session submission, help me bring out more details, help me add some goals or objectives to this session description, and so on, or make this session outline better.
Yeah, that's one of the cases that I am actually most interested in. For example, well, things like that, I guess you'd say. Yeah, yeah. For example, a summary based on a PowerPoint deck, or a project status report based on project information in project service system, or something like that, where it's taking a lot of information and consolidating it down in a way that would take someone a while. Like, I think that's pretty interesting.
So let's go back to getting some practical answers. Hopefully, I'm asking prompts that are going to be effective. What is a good use for Copilot for small businesses? I think that is fairly well-rounded for a prompt. I could have absolutely added more details. I could have asked it for a short bulleted list. Can you make this a shorter list? I could have started with that. I didn't know how talkative Copilot was going to be. So it
Mm-hmm.
took that list and it kind of shrunk it down. It effectively says the same thing, but in a more concise way. So if I were trying to convince my boss that we need things like Copilot in our business, then this is a path I could take to get that information.
Yeah, and just from a language perspective, I won't go too far into that, but it does have an efficient use of language in a case like this, where with my editor hat on, people tend to not always naturally do that when they write, at least in a first draft. So I like that it can kind of word things in an efficient way.
Yes, I agree. From a personal perspective, I have asked Copilot's help in determining a vacation spot. So I've
Hmm.
spoken on several different podcasts before about my annual Women's International Networking event, or WINE for short. It's a group of professional friends and I. We get together every year and rent a nice house for a long weekend together. And I'm in Colorado. We've got someone in Fargo, someone in Austin, someone in Orlando, St. Louis, Toronto. And so I put in all of our locations, put in the time of year we wanted to go, and said, help me find a good location for us to go. And it gave me responses that were geographically central to all of us, that might make a good weekend getaway for a group of professional girlfriends.
Makes sense. And how did the results come out?
Um, from a logical perspective, Copilot generically gave me good answers. However,
Yeah.
because I know our group of friends, I can tell you that nobody wanted to go to Omaha, Nebraska just because it was geographically central.
Canoeing or something, or
Yeah, I don't know. We
walk.
actually we're going to Vermont this year.
Oh, nice.
Is farther for me, but I don't mind taking a slightly longer flight. I travel a lot, whereas some of the other women in the group don't travel as much and would prefer to have a 1 hour flight to a 3 hour flight.
Right, right. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think the more you know, it seems like the more you know, the more likely it could, cross reference the different factors and come up with some good options.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's see, what's a good way to wrap a podcast episode? Let's see what Copilot tells us we should be doing. Farewell, dear listener. Okay, so somehow it's decided to be very creative.
Ugh, no, thank you.
Until then,
Thanks, but
dear
no thanks,
listener,
Copilot.
let's see, we're going to sign off with gratitude and a virtual hug. Stay curious, stay inspired, and stay tuned. That just does not sound like us.
No, it's not really either of our styles. I think hopefully listeners know that we're always sort of embracing them in a way, aren't we?
Yes, absolutely. We don't have to talk about virtual hug.
Everything we say kind of exudes our appreciation and
But I will close with talking about the training co-pilots that we have at 365.Training. So we have several courses that we've included our 365 AI, which is your training co-pilot that has been grounded in the data and information specific to a course topic that is just integrated with the course. So you can at any time ask this training co-pilot your questions and it will give you in context answers while you're training. So I think, and that's included in no additional cost on any of the courses that we have with it. So I think it's another good, safe way to be using AI in practical terms. I think AI and Copilot are really effective as whispers, not as shouts. And I think that it's a safe place to explore AI and how it can help your business and your day to day.
yeah, that sounds like a smart use. The other thing I get coming out of this conversation is really that idea of how do you get better at using Copilot interfaces to get the most out of them? Like, what is it? How well can people do it on their own? How much training do they really need just on that skill alone to really make? Because one of the inevitabilities from what I'm seeing from Microsoft is they're going to expect people to use this kind of approach more and more as they interact with business systems, going back to that, side of the world. And I mean, when I watch the demos that I've seen going back to like last week in where was I, San Diego, I don't consider much of that intuitive. I consider it a real challenge. I'm not saying it's impossible, but yeah, the skill of the Copilot interaction and prompting itself is going to be a big one. So this was a great experience for me, Julie, just to see you take a few steps through some of these scenarios. And yeah, I think what you're talking about in 365.Training will also be really useful.
Great. Well, with that, until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and stay tuned. Bye
Thanks a lot, Julie. Bye, everyone.
bye.